All came in at 2:47 in the morning, and Margot Tessier almost didn't answer it. Already in her car, already peeling out of the parking garage at St. Raphael's, her scrubs still carrying the particular smell of the ICU. Antiseptic and something underneath that no amount of hand sanitizer could fully cover. 14 hours. She'd been on her feet for 14 hours straight, the last 4 of which she'd spent holding the hand of a 63-year-old man named Gerald, who was terrified and alone, and whose daughter was driving in from Sudbury and wasn't going to make it in time. Gerald made it. His daughter did not make it in time. Margot stayed until the family arrived anyway. She was 31 years old, a registered nurse with 8 years behind her, 6 of those in the ICU, and before that 2 tours in Kandahar as a combat medic with the Canadian Forces. She knew what exhaustion felt like. She knew the difference between tired and broken. Tonight she was somewhere between the two. Left knee was wrapped under her scrub pants. A torn meniscus, 3 weeks post-surgery, not yet cleared for full duty. She'd gone back anyway because the unit was short-staffed and because Margot Tessier was not the kind of person who stayed home when people needed her. Her orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Fenwick, had used the word reckless. Margot had used the word fine. Pulled onto Carling Avenue heading west, the Ottawa streets empty and slicked with a light November rain. Her apartment was 11 minutes away. She was thinking about nothing except her bed when the lights came on behind her. Red and blue filling her rear-view mirror. She checked her speed, 52 in a 50 zone. She checked her signal. She'd used it. She pulled over anyway, instinct, training, and pulled her registration from the glove box before the officer even reached her window. The officer who approached was not in a hurry. That was the first thing she noticed. He walked slowly, deliberately, with his flashlight pointed directly at her face, even after she'd rolled down the window and the interior light was already on. She squinted and held up one hand. "Holding," she said. "Can I ask what I was pulled over for?" Bert didn't answer. He was looking at her scrubs. At the hospital badge still clipped to her chest, at the compression sleeve visible above her left knee where her pant leg had ridden up. His name tag read Lachance. He looked about 45, with the particular kind of stillness that Margot had learned to read in her time overseas. Not calmness, but the performed version of it. "Those license and registration," he said. "Both over. I'm a nurse at St. Raphael's. Just finished a 14-hour shift. I live about 5 minutes from here." "1. Have you been drinking tonight, ma'am?" "Oh, I've been working." "Right." Not a question. He turned her license over in his hand. "Tessier, you from Gatineau originally?" "We'll answer that." It wasn't relevant, and they both knew it. "Bleat. I'd like to know what I was pulled over for," she said again, keeping her voice even. "Step out of the vehicle, please." "Or, I'm sorry?" "Ola. Out of the vehicle." Looked at him for a moment. "Officer Lachance, I have a post-surgical knee injury. My surgeon has told me to limit weight-bearing activity. I've just completed a 14-hour shift, and I'd like to understand the reason for this stop before I." "Vehicle. Now, there is a particular calculus that women do in situations like this. Margot had done it before, in darker places than a wet street in Ottawa. She did it now. She unlocked the door, moved slowly, put both feet on the ground, and stood. Her left knee ached immediately, and she steadied herself against the car door. Lachance watched her. Something moved across his face, not sympathy. "Walk to the back of the vehicle." "I've told you I have a knee injury. I'm going to need you to walk to the back of the vehicle." Walked, slowly, with one hand on the side of the car. The rain had picked up. She was in her scrubs with no jacket, her hospital badge catching the wet light, and she thought about Gerald and his daughter, and she thought, "This is not Kandahar. This is Carling Avenue. It will be fine." Was not fine. Lachance put her hands behind her back and told her she was being detained for suspicion of impaired driving. She said she had not been drinking. He said a field sobriety test would confirm that. She said she could not perform a roadside sobriety test on a post-surgical knee, standing on one leg, walking a straight line, without risking re-injury. He said that was not his problem. She asked to call someone. He said she could do that from the station. She said her phone was in the car. Put her in the back of the cruiser. She sat there for 11 minutes. She counted, watching the rain run down the window, watching Lachance walk back to her car and lean inside with his flashlight. She was cold, and her knee was now genuinely hurting, and she had been awake for 17 hours, and somewhere in the sequence of those facts she felt something she recognized and did not want to feel. Not fear exactly. The thing that lives next to fear. At the station she was processed. She submitted to a breathalyser. The result was 0.0. She told the intake officer, a younger woman named Constable Parr, who had the decency to look uncomfortable, that she needed to contact someone. Parr gave her a phone. She called the on-call supervisor at St. Raphael's, a charge nurse named Bernadette, who had known Margot for 6 years and who said very quietly, "Stay calm, I'm calling someone." Bernadette called was Margot's unit manager, who called the hospital's patient advocacy liaison, who had a contact in the Ottawa Police Service's Professional Standards Unit. None of that happened quickly. These things never do. What happened first was Lachance filed his report. He wrote that Margot had been driving erratically. He wrote that she had been unsteady on her feet and slurred in her speech. He wrote that she had refused to comply with field sobriety testing. He wrote that upon searching her vehicle, a search he had conducted while she sat in his cruiser, he had found a prescription bottle in the center console that he believed to be inconsistent with her stated profession. The bottle was hydromorphone. It was prescribed to Margot Tessier, dispensed 3 weeks ago following her knee surgery. The prescription label was clear. The dosage instructions were clear. The prescribing physician's name was clear. That appeared in Lachance's report with any clarity at all. 4:30 in the morning, Margot had been in the station for over 90 minutes. She had not been charged with anything. She had not been released. She sat in a room that wasn't quite a cell, and wasn't quite not a cell, and she kept her hands in her lap, and she breathed the way she'd learned to breathe, in places where breathing was the only thing she could control. The door opened. The officer who came in was not Lachance. He was younger, mid-30s, dark jacket, no cap. He carried 2 paper cups of coffee, and he set one in front of her without asking. His name was Sergeant Beaulieu, and he said he was with the Professional Standards Unit, and that he'd been called in from home. "Read the report," he said. "I'd like to hear your account." All of it, in sequence, the way she'd learned to document in the forces, times, locations, exact words where she could recall them. She was a good witness. She had always been a good witness. Beaulieu listened. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he said, "Officer Lachance indicated that your driving was erratic. Is there any reason your driving might have appeared that way? Fatigue, distraction, something mechanical with your vehicle?" "Driving was not erratic," she said. "I was doing 52 kilometers an hour on a wet road at 3 in the morning. That's not erratic. That's cautious." "Beaulieu will tell us," Beaulieu said. "Lie. Then let's look at it." He looked at it. She was not in the room when he did, but she could tell from the length of time he was gone, 22 minutes. And from his expression, when he came back, that what he'd seen on that footage was not what Lachance's report described. "Monsieur," he said. And then he stopped, started again. "Margot, I owe you an apology on behalf of this service. Not a formal one yet. That will come through proper channels. But from me right now, as the person sitting across from you, I'm sorry." Cry. She had cried earlier, alone in that room, when she was sure no one was watching. She was not doing it again. "What happens now?" she said. What happened now was a process. Beaulieu was honest about that. He did not promise her speed or simplicity. He told her that Lachance's dashcam showed a vehicle driving well within the posted limit, with full stops, correct lane use, no observable signs of impairment. He told her that her breathalyser result of .00 had been logged. He told her that the prescription bottle in her console was clearly labeled and clearly legal, and that the characterization in Lachance's report was, he used the word misleading. She asked what that meant for Lachance. He said that would depend on what the investigation found. She asked if there would be an investigation. He said yes. There were things she didn't know yet that she would learn over the following weeks. She didn't know that Lachance had received 2 previous complaints in 3 years. Both from women, both involving stops late at night, both resolved through internal processes that produced no disciplinary record. D. She didn't know that the second complaint had been filed by a woman who worked at a gas station on Merivale Road and who had tried to pursue it and been told politely and firmly that there wasn't sufficient evidence to proceed. She didn't know that Beaulieu had been aware of Lachance for some time, that Lachance's sergeant had flagged certain patterns in his incident reports, and that what had been missing until tonight was a case clean enough and documented enough to move on. Margot Tessier, with her 0.00 breathalyser and her Dashcam contradicted arrest report and her hospital badge and her surgical records and her 14-hour shift, was, in the particular brutal mathematics of these situations, a clean case. She went home at 6 in the morning. Bernadette picked her up because Margot's car had been impounded and wouldn't be released until 9. Bernadette didn't say much. She was the kind of person who understood that the time to talk was not always now. She handed Margot a coffee and drove, and Margot watched Ottawa come to light outside the window, the early commuters, the delivery trucks, the city assembling itself for a day that knew nothing about what had happened in it overnight. "Will you be okay?" Bernadette said, pulling up to Margot's building. "Yes," Margot said, because she had learned that there is a version of okay that means not this moment, but eventually, and that is still true. She slept until 2 in the afternoon. She woke up to 14 text messages, 3 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize, and an email from a lawyer named Hélène Coté who worked with a civil rights firm in the Glebe and who had been contacted by someone at St. Raphael's Patient Advocacy. The email was 2 paragraphs. The last sentence was, "We would very much like to speak with you, if you're willing." Or, she was willing. The case took 7 months from beginning to end, which is fast by the standard of these things, and the speed had a reason. The dashcam footage was unambiguous. The breathalyser result was logged and time-stamped. Margot's surgical records, her shift record for that night, her prescription documentation. All of it formed a picture that was, in Hélène Coté's precise language, extremely difficult to dispute. The woman from the gas station on Merivale Road agreed to provide a statement. The retired officer who had worked briefly with Lachance 5 years earlier agreed to speak, off the record, about things he had seen. The second complaint that had been resolved without a disciplinary record was reopened. Lachance was suspended without pay in February. He was formally dismissed in April. In May, a provincial tribunal reviewing the case issued a finding that the Ottawa Police Service's internal complaint resolution process had failed in its handling of the prior complaints, and recommended a series of reforms including mandatory supervisory review of all late-night traffic stops that resulted in detention without charge. The reforms passed. Beau was not in the room when most of this happened. She was, on most of those days, at the hospital. Her knee healed properly this time. Dr. Fenwick had finally gotten her to stay off it long enough. She was back in the ICU by January, a few shifts per week at first, then full-time by March. Gerald sent a card at Christmas. His daughter had written a note on the inside that said, "On behalf of our whole family, thank you." Hélène Coté called the morning after the tribunal's decision to tell her. Margot was in the parking garage at St. Raphael's, just finished a morning shift. Standing next to her car, the same car, impound retrieved and eventually returned, in more or less the same spot she'd been standing in when she'd gotten into it 8 months earlier. "Done," Hélène said. "The reforms passed. The finding stands." Beau leaned against the car. The parkade smelled like exhaust and damp concrete. Somewhere on a floor above her, a car was starting. "Woman from Merivale?" she asked. "Her statement is part of the formal record. Permanently." Beau was quiet for a moment. She thought about 2:47 in the morning, about a man walking slowly toward her window with a flashlight pointed at her face, about a room that was not quite a cell, about Beaulieu setting down a paper cup of coffee without asking if she wanted it. Lot. She thought about the gas station on Merivale Road and a woman who had tried and been told there wasn't enough evidence and had waited. "Okay," Margot said. "Thank you." Got into her car. She used her signal. She pulled out into the Ottawa morning, 11 minutes from home. Moment in Margot's story that I keep coming back to. Not the arrest. Not the tribunal. It's the 11 minutes she sat in the back of that cruiser, counting, watching the rain move down the window, choosing in the middle of something completely out of her control to stay present and clear. Well, I think about what it actually takes to do that. Most of us, when we're frightened and wronged and exhausted, don't count minutes. We spiral. We say things we can't unsay. We let the injustice make us loud in ways that end up being used against us. Margot didn't. And I don't think that came from nowhere. I think it came from years of building something in herself that the moment could draw on. She had done 2 tours overseas. She had stood in ICU rooms at 3 in the morning with people who were terrified. She had learned, the hard way and the long way, that how you carry yourself when things fall apart is not a personality trait. It's a practice. It's something you build deliberately over time through choices that seem small until they aren't. Part that stays with me. Not that Margot was special, that she was prepared. There's a version of this story where she gets out of that car and loses her temper, understandably, justifiably. And Lachance's report has a little more to work with. There's a version where she doesn't keep her documentation in order, where the prescription label is somewhere in a drawer at home, where the shift record is harder to pull. There's a version where she doesn't know her rights clearly enough to ask, twice, calmly, what she was pulled over for. Or, in any of those versions, the dashcam still shows the same empty road. But the case around it looks different. What I take from Margot's story is that integrity isn't just a moral quality, it's a practical one. The care she took with her own record, her own conduct, her own documentation, was the same care she took with her patients. It wasn't performed for anyone, it was just how she operated. And when the moment came that required it, it was already there. I think about Sergeant Beaulieu, too. He drove in from home in the middle of the night because something felt wrong in a report. He sat across from a woman he didn't know and listened to all of it without interrupting. He looked at the footage before he said a word. That's not a small thing. That's someone who understood that his job, the real version of it, required him to think clearly under pressure rather than just defer to what had already been written down. Woman from Merivale Road. She had tried and been turned away, and she waited, and when someone asked, she gave her statement anyway. That kind of persistence, quiet, undramatic, unglamorous, is maybe the hardest thing to sustain. It doesn't make headlines. It just slowly, incrementally, makes things more true. I don't think the world changes in big moments. I think it changes because people like Margot count to 11 in the back of a cruiser and hold themselves together. Because people like Beaulieu drive in at 4 in the morning. Because people who've been dismissed once decide to try again. That's the thing worth carrying out of this story.